So, Jimmy, what theories are there about Our Lady of Zaytun?
To investigate the apparitions, we need to consider three types of theories that could be responsible for them. First, there are naturalistic theories, things that would account for them that would be purely conventional. Second, they could have a paranormal explanation, something that isn't conventional but also wouldn't be a genuine manifestation of the Virgin Mary. And then finally, third, they could have a supernatural explanation.
Before we start analyzing the different theories from the reason perspective, let's talk about the evidence we have to work with. There are a lot of photos from Zaytun. What should we make of them?
Unfortunately, I don't think we can put a great deal of weight on the photographs. In some cases, we don't know who took them, which means that they could be fake. We know that vendors were selling photographs to the spectators, and vendors can't be assumed to be above faking photographs to make a buck. In other cases, we do know who took the photos, but unfortunately they've been retouched, particularly to make the edges of the images stand out more. The sky has frequently been blacked out to make it darker so that you can see the luminous shapes better. That's why the shapes have such sharp edges in the photos. In some cases, the retouching has extended to sketching over the figure of the Virgin Mary to make her image clearer. For example, we know of one image that was retouched in this way by Dr. Labib Shenouda, who did the additional sketching from his memory of seeing the apparition. Fortunately, in this case, we also have the original unretouched image, which is significantly blurrier. In any event, as a result of these factors, I don't think we can put much evidential weight on the details of these photographs, though the ones that have known sources, even if they've been retouched, together with the eyewitness accounts, really do reveal that there were genuine light phenomena taking place at the church.
What about other evidence that we have?
Of course, we have numerous eyewitness statements, some of which we've heard, and some of which we'll quote as we go forward. I particularly like quoting official documents whenever possible, and one of these was prepared by Pope Kyrillos' Commission of Hegumens. It was a summary letter that dealt with both the experiences of the public transportation workers who were Muslim and with their own experiences, the Hegumens, when they visited the site. This letter hasn't generally been public from my reading of the sources, but it is found in the Coptic Patriarchate's book for the 50th anniversary of the apparitions, and it's an official document summarizing some of the evidence they gathered. So we will read it here in full.
To His Holiness Pope Kyrillos VI, Pope of Alexandria and Patriarch of the See of St. Mark, with subordination to your apostolic seat, we kiss your pure hands and ask for your righteous prayers. Your faithful sons, Hegumen Father Gergis Mata, Hegumen Father Johanna Abdelmasi, and Hegumen Father Benjamin Kamel, are honored to present this report on the apparition of the Virgin St. Mary in her church located at Zaytun area. We were glad that Your Holiness has chosen us to visit the Church of the Virgin Mary at Zaytun. We went on Tuesday, April 23, 1968. When we first arrived, we wanted to interview those who saw the apparition of the Virgin Mary. We entered the garage opposite the church, but it was 9 p.m., so we called the workers of the garage, which belonged to the Public Transportation Authority. They assured us that they saw the Virgin themselves with their own eyes on the first night she was seen 4 weeks ago. Each one of them said that he was not the only one who saw her, but that she was also seen by other co-workers at the same time, as well as by a large number of people by coincidence. They were passing by at that moment. This is the summary of the accounts of the workers of the garage of the Institution of Public Transportation. 1. Mr. Mamoun Afifi, the instructor for the drivers of public transportation, his national ID number is 9937, El Sayedi Province, said,
I was still awake in the garage facing the church at 8:30 a.m. on Tuesday, April 2nd, 1968, when I heard the parking guard standing at the door shouting loudly, "Light on top of the dome." So I went out quickly and saw with my own eyes a lady moving over the dome and radiating an unusual light, which lit the darkness of the area around the dome. So I looked harder, and my eyes were fixed on her, and I saw that she was the Virgin. And I saw her walk over the smooth dome, and her body was a flame of light. And she walked calmly. I could not hold myself from shouting, "God has purified and chosen you from among all the women of the world."
2. As for the guard named Mr. Abdel Aziz, working in the garage of the Public Transportation Authority, he also said that as soon as he saw the Virgin, he saw her as a body of light over the dome. He started to shout,
"Light over the dome!" And I called to Hussein Awad, who hurried along with the other workers and saw the Virgin moving over the dome. I said, "They were forbidden this year from visiting the Virgin in Jerusalem, so she came to visit them herself."
Mr. Hussein Awad, a blacksmith in the garage of the Public Transportation Authority, National ID number 33289, El Giza Province, commented,
"I saw the Virgin over the dome of the church as a body of radiant light, lighting the place like the sun. The Virgin was holding what looked like a branch of an olive tree and began to move. The light was shining from her body to all surrounding areas. The light then began to form a circle with the Virgin in its center. This scene I have never seen before."
Mr. Yakut Ali, the worker at the garage of the Public Transportation Authority, described how the Virgin walked over the dome. He said,
"It was a flowing, brightly illuminated body in space. As soon as her feet touched the surface of the dome, they moved quietly, surrounded by a halo of reverence and holiness. Those who saw her were standing in awe and were taken by the magnificent view until this scene disappeared inside the dome."
Your Holiness the Pope, these are the words of the employees of the General Transportation Company. We wanted to make sure ourselves, so we went on many occasions. One night we witnessed the Lady, the Virgin, appearing first with a celestial spherical light with the Virgin inside it. She then appeared with her whole body, moved over the dome, prostrated herself towards the cross, and blessed the joyful crowds who were shouting with their supplications. On another night, we saw bright silver shining doves flying directly from the dome to the sky. We glorified God who allowed us, the earthly, to see the glory of the heavenly. All this is due to your holiness's pure prayers and powerful supplications for your people. We ask God to perpetuate your life as an asset and pride to the Church and to unite the Orthodox faith at your hands. Please accept our submission to your apostolic seat, and may he perpetuate for us and the people of the Church your archpriesthood. April 30th, 1968 AD, Baramuda 22, 1684 AM.
So the Hegumans confirmed the testimony of the public transportation workers, even though they had initially thought that the woman they saw might be a normal person about to commit suicide. They ended up concluding that it was the Virgin Mary. The Hegumans also visited the site themselves, and they reported seeing the apparitions with their own eyes.
What can we say about Our Lady of Zaytun from the reason perspective? What kind of naturalistic explanations for the apparitions would there be?
The two principal theories that we need to examine are hoax and misidentification. That is, whether someone could have pulled this off as an elaborate hoax, and whether it could have been an innocent misidentification of a purely natural phenomenon.
Let's talk about the hoax theory. If you were going to argue that it was a hoax, what would you point to?
In the 19th century, there were a large number of what are known today as physical mediums, and a large number of them are known to have been hoaxers. Physical mediums claim to manifest the presence of ghosts through physical phenomena, such as moving objects, playing musical instruments, and materializing glowing objects. We talked about physical mediums some in episode 200 on the Ghost Bride. Many of these mediums were exposed by the British and American Societies for Psychical Research, and they found that they were using magician's tricks. They performed in darkness to make it harder to see what they were doing. In fact, that's where the whole idea of doing seances and ghost hunts in the dark came from. Real parapsychologists don't want to work in the dark because it cuts down on your ability to see things. And physical mediums would use chemicals, often containing element 15 or phosphorus, to make objects that they pretended to materialize glow, because white phosphorus glows in contact with the oxygen in the atmosphere. So, one theory to consider is whether someone could have pulled off an elaborate hoax using phosphorus or another chemical to make a woman appear to glow, and doves appear to glow, and other light phenomena. The stars or sparkles that people reported seeing similarly could have been caused by pyrotechnic means or fireworks, and the clouds and incense that people reported could have also been caused by conventional means. So it would seem to be possible to generate a lot of the things that people reported seeing through natural chemical means.
Then let's look at the other side of the argument. Are there factors that weigh against it being a hoax?
We won't go through every conceivable objection that I can think of, but here are a number of them. First, in order to pull off a hoax like this, the perpetrators would have to be people inside the parish. A lot of the phenomena originated from the roof of the parish, so they would need roof access. But it doesn't appear that the priest was in on it, since he was at home and had to be summoned when the first apparition took place. It could have been other people in the parish, but the windows of the dome are sealed shut and do not open, so you couldn't use them to climb out of or release birds through them. Also, the dome is dozens of feet up in the air, and there's no real way to climb up to it without scaffolding. I'm sure there are ways to get onto the roof, but that wouldn't explain everything the people reported seeing. In the first place, the lights they reported seeing were way brighter than what you'd get from chemical luminescence. That tends to produce soft glows, but people sometimes reported seeing bright lights. And to produce those, you'd likely need electrical equipment that you wouldn't be able to hide. People would see spotlights coming from the church or aimed at the church. Spotlights would cut through the haze in the air and betray their presence. Also, the figure of the woman was reported to descend from the roof to the garden below the church, and she was reported to float down, not to plummet like a woman leaping off the roof. Further, she sometimes was reported to float up into the air, and there's no way for a human to do that without a jetpack, which they didn't have in 1968, or without a winch, which would have been seen. Then there are the doves, which people said were not only larger than normal doves, but which numerous witnesses said flew without flapping their wings. So you couldn't just coat dusts in phosphorus and release them. People also said that they sometimes saw the doves and the woman simply fade out, which is not what would happen if they were covered in a glowing chemical. That would fade out slowly over a long period of time, not suddenly. And people reported that the woman was bright enough that you couldn't always make out her shape. You'll recall Cynthia Nelson's testimony that she could see the outline of the woman if she thought about it, but if she told herself it was an illusion, she lost the outline of the woman. That's not something that you would expect to happen if a woman were simply covered in a light-producing chemical, or if you had a super bright light shining on her. Further, these apparitions went on for more than 3 years. There were more than 90 of them, and nobody ever caught the hoaxers. That's very improbable. If I were going to hoax an apparition, I'd do it once, or maybe a few times, but doing it more than 90 times, often with thousands of pairs of eyeballs watching, I wouldn't do that. The risk of getting caught would be too high. Yet nobody ever caught the hoaxers. Nobody ever found a smoke machine. Nobody ever found spotlights. Nobody ever found a chemically laced dove, and some of them would have landed nearby. And nobody ever found a supply of light-producing chemicals. Given the complexity and magnitude of everything that happened, there's significant evidence against the hoax hypothesis. There's also another reason, which also strikes against the misidentification hypothesis, but I'll hold that one back for now.
Then let's talk about the misidentification hypothesis. What could be said in favor of this one?
A known phenomenon in human psychology is pareidolia, which is the tendency to impose a meaningful pattern on a nebulous stimulus. And this is known to happen in connection with religious imagery. That's why, back in 1994, a woman named Diane Dicer was cooking a grilled cheese sandwich, and when she looked at it, she thought that the char pattern on the toast looked like the face of the Virgin Mary. It became an international sensation in the news, and the sandwich eventually sold for $28,000, which would be worth $56,000 today after all the inflation the government has caused. In the case of Zaytoun, we have some witnesses saying they could see the Virgin Mary's features very clearly, including her eyes, nose, and teeth. But we also have other witnesses, like Cynthia Nelson, who said she could see the Virgin Mary's outline if she looked at the image the right way, but if she looked at it another way, the human outline would disappear. That's also reported in the cases of other apparitions, both in parapsychology and in the religious world. In parapsychological apparitions, some people report seeing a ghost clear as day, and they can even mistake it for a living human being, while other witnesses who are present see something, but they don't see it clearly. Similarly, in the Bible, there are apparitions where some people see or hear something clearly, like when God speaks to Jesus in John chapter 12, and some of those who are present hear what God says clearly, but others think they've just heard thunder. Or when Jesus converts St. Paul in Acts 9, St. Paul hears what Jesus says clearly, but the men who were with him couldn't make out what the voice was saying. So it's not uncommon in apparitions for some people to perceive them clearly, while others who are present don't perceive them clearly. But as part of the investigative stage, we still need to ask whether pareidolia could be involved in this case. Could there have been light sources that people mentally imposed the image of the Virgin Mary on, like in the cheese sandwich example, and thus it was a purely natural phenomenon?
That would still require that there be a light source for people to see as the Virgin Mary or as doves or whatever. Are there any natural light sources that it could have been?
People on the ground actually did us a big favor by eliminating the common ones. You'll recall that on the first night of the apparitions, the police chief thought that the light might have been coming from nearby streetlights, so he broke them, and that eliminated the nearby streetlights as a cause. Then, a few days later, they shut down the power in the area to eliminate any other electrical light sources from the neighborhood. That might really annoy me if I lived in the neighborhood, but speaking as a paranormal investigator, I'm like, good job, excellent process of elimination. They also cut the trees to give people an unobstructed view of the light phenomenon, which would help eliminate distant reflections by letting you see what was going on clearly. Of course, someone could still have brought a generator or battery-powered spotlight to the scene, but spotlights would have been seen by the crowd. The haze in the air, and Cairo can be a pretty hazy city, especially back in the 1960s before modern emission reduction technology in cars. The haze in the air would have made the beams visible, at least on some of the nights during the more than 90 appearances, and especially when those clouds that smelled like incense were present. So the conventional, natural light sources that you'd think of seem to be eliminated.
Are there any unconventional but natural light sources that have been proposed?
There is one: earthquake lights. Earthquake lights are reported to be lights that appear in the air in association with earthquakes. We know that certain rocks under stress can generate electrical charges. The theory is that when these rocks are under tectonic stress, seismic stress, they can cause lights to appear above the surface. And in 1989, John Durr and Michael Persinger published an article in which they proposed that the lights seen at Zaytun were caused in part by tectonic strain. They claimed in their article to find associations between when the apparitions occurred and seismic activity about 400 kilometers or 250 miles to the southeast of Zaytun. The association wasn't perfect, but they proposed that this activity was at least partly responsible for the lights, along with other unknown factors.
What do you make of that theory?
Earthquake lights are controversial, and not everybody is convinced that they're real or that they would happen in this kind of circumstance. It's also been pointed out that neither Durr nor Persinger were geologists. Instead, they were experts in psychology, and they published their paper in a psychology journal. Here's part of what skeptic Brian Dunning of the Skeptoid podcast had to say about this theory.
There's one science-y sounding explanation for the Zaytun lights that is mentioned in virtually every skeptical article on the subject: earthquake lights. To grasp the plausibility or implausibility of earthquake lights as an explanation for Our Lady of Zaytun, you need only listen to my full Skeptoid episode on earthquake lights, number 534. In it, you'll find that despite widespread popular belief in earthquake lights, there is neither evidence for their existence nor any plausible theory suggesting anything like them might exist. Without exception, every time the source of a so-called earthquake light caught on video has been conclusively identified, it's been either lightning from a distant storm unrelated to the earthquake, the explosion of an electrical transformer directly related to the earthquake, or a cloud illuminated by the sun that should never have been called an earthquake light in the first place. There has never been any need to go in search of an exotic explanation for a mysterious phenomenon that we have no reason to believe exists. But using them to explain Our Lady of Zaytun stretches this to an even further level of absurdity. Dare and Persinger, the original authors, correlated her appearance to seismic activity 400 kilometers to the southeast. They were suggesting that these earthquakes caused lights that manifested neither as great flashes in the sky nor as sparks along the ground, but as a fully formed and recognizable human figure standing still or walking slowly on the rooftop of one particular church 400 kilometers to the northwest for quiet hours at a time over a period of 3 years. No other such apparitions were reported in this alleged 400-kilometer radius at all over that same period of time. Why not? Because it's a terrible, terrible explanation, and it is wrong.
Unfortunately, Dunning does not have an explanation for what the lights were. He acknowledges that they existed, that there really were strange light phenomena at Zaytun, but as a hardcore skeptic, he attributes the apparitions to wishful misperception of the lights as the Virgin Mary. He seems unable or unwilling to accept the possibility that the lights could have a non-natural origin, but he has no explanation for what the lights were. He says,
"We need no earthquake lights, no miracles, and no papal declarations to explain Our Lady of Zaytun. We need only a great collective desire and belief by a passionate populace, triggered by some unknown, inconsequential, various light sources that could have been anything."
Dunning tries to sound persuasive, but could have been anything is not a satisfactory explanation in my mind. Dunning seems boxed in by a naturalistic mindset that's unable to acknowledge anything non-natural, and that's not open-mindedness. But I do agree with him that the earthquake lights theory isn't a good explanation. I'm more open to the question of whether earthquake lights might exist. I haven't researched that question in depth yet, but we may cover it on a future episode of the program. However, I find it very hard to suppose that earthquakes or seismic activity 250 miles away would cause human-shaped light sources to be seen at one specific church over a period of 3 years without other light phenomena being reported elsewhere. That seems very improbable. So, despite our differences, I agree with Dunning that the earthquake lights explanation for Zaytun is super speculative and very unlikely, so not buying it.
You said that there was one argument that you were going to hold back for the moment that dealt with both the hoax theory and the misperception theories. What was that?
Miracles. If the apparitions were a hoax, or if they were misperceptions of natural phenomena, they would not cause miraculous healings to happen. You'll recall that Farooq Muhammad Atwa, the transportation worker who pointed at the Virgin Mary on the first night, had a gangrenous finger that he was scheduled to have amputated the next day. But when he went to the hospital, the finger was found healthy and he got to keep it. Well, that was far from the only medically unexplainable healing connected with the apparitions. For example, to name just one source, the 50th anniversary book produced by the Coptic Patriarchate, it contains multiple miracle reports. This is one of them.
Mr. Riyad Naguib Azer, Bachelor of Commerce, University of Alexandria, said, I developed a retinal detachment due to rupture of the retinal vein in my right eye. The internal hemorrhage continued for 21 days, followed by a clot in front of the retina. A group of ophthalmologists announced that it had no treatment, no cure in Egypt or abroad. This shocked me, but I believed in God's mercy, especially when I heard what was published in the newspaper Watani about the apparitions of the Blessed Holy Virgin St. Mary to millions at Zaytun Church, named after her. On the morning of Sunday, April 21, day of the Resurrection Feast, I traveled to Cairo, accompanied by my mother and my friend, Fikri El Said El Shawawi. Together we went to the church, prayed, and asked others to pray on my behalf. I spent the night there, yet she didn't appear, and on the evening of the next day, Easter Monday, suddenly the Virgin appeared, and the crowd started cheering joyfully. Without knowing, I closed my left eye with my hand and lifted up my eyes to the sky and screamed, praying, If medicine has failed, the Lord will not fail. Then the greatest surprise of my life occurred. I saw the Virgin St. Mary appearing as we know her, glowing with a light brighter than I had ever seen before, with white doves circling around her. I saw all of this with my blind right eye. Then she disappeared. Then I looked at my mother and my friend Fikri and screamed, I see with my right eye. People started gathering around me, and they carried me on their shoulders as I continued screaming, I am healed! A miracle has happened to me!
Here, Bishop Marcos reports a healing that he witnessed.
We had a man who was very crippled. His hands were paralyzed and his back was bent, and he could barely speak. At approximately 7 o'clock in the evening, I saw him begin to move his hands and then his fingers, and then the rest of his body. Before long, he threw his canes from his hands and began to run around the church, blessing God, because now he was healed.
And here Bishop Gregorius reports one that occurred to a Muslim woman who later came to him.
With a stick in her hand, she said, I am bringing this stick with me, not because I need it any more, but to convince you that I was paralyzed, and I was depending on this stick, and now I don't need it.
And Father Johanna similarly reports,
3 months after the apparition, other servants and myself witnessed a miracle while we were standing at the north yard of the church. We saw a blind and paralyzed lady entering the church on a wheelchair. She came to the church following the Virgin Mary's promise, who visited her at night saying, Visit my church at Zaytun, and you will be cured. She came to the church following the Virgin Mary's promise, who visited her at night saying, Visit my church at Zaytun, and you will be cured. A strong light radiated from the northeastern dome when the lady stepped into the church. We then saw her standing and moving towards the church, leaving the wheelchair behind in a stream of joy and praise.